Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels from Sandusky, Ohio, and I'm very excited to talk with my guest today. His name came up as part of the conversation that I had last week during my interview with Danny Marshall of the Western Bulldogs, and I reached out to him following the episode, and he was gracious enough to join us today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome the Managing Director of Global Sports 360, Mr. Cameron Richardson, to the show. Welcome, Mr. Richardson.
Hi, Craig. How are you?
I am great. I'm great. It's 7:15 on a Friday morning here and raring to go.
Well,
Thanks for
it's
coming on today.
9:15, I think, or 9:15 or 10:15 on a Friday night. I wouldn't say raring to go. Probably in a little bit of wind down mode after a week's work, but excited to be on your show and privileged that you reached out. So hopefully we can provide a little bit more insight for the listeners, and hopefully we have a good time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This was I had a great time talking to Danny last week. She's seems to be one of the kindest, most grounded people I've talked to in a long time. I teach school for a living, and it was a great interview, and your name came up as being somebody who was integral in her becoming, an AFLW player. Like I said, last week I sat down to talk with her, and how did you go about finding yourself in the position where you discovered Danny, and I'll mention the other player that you were looking at as well, Sarah Roner. How did you find yourself in that position?
Craig, I was in Los Angeles in August 2018 on a personal holiday, and a very close friend of mine, James Waddell, who now resides in the United States, and James has had a variety of roles with the Denver Bulldogs, had said to me, when you get to America, drop into Los Angeles, which you have to do anyway, flying in from Australia. But he said, stay in LA for the weekend. We've got a footy tournament going on. There's a player or two I think you might want to have a look at to see if they're good, potentially good enough for the AFLW. And Sarah Edwards Rona was that player, and we chatted before the game, and I just said, oh yeah, I'll have a look. I chatted to Sarah, chatted to James, and said that if you're serious about coming out and I like what I see, then through a previous life being employed by the Footscray Football Club, which is now the Western Bulldogs, I've retained some 25 or 30-year friendships through that involvement. And I said I'll have a look at the games and run some water and just get involved, which I did. And the Denver team didn't have enough ladies at the time to make up a full team on this weekend. And there were some girls that had flown in from Phoenix that were with the Arizona Hawks, as I later found out, to help them fill in the team and compete against the team from Los Angeles, which is quite strong. It was a tallish girl on the team, and I never got to meet her on the trip. I never met her personally face to face, but she was playing in the ruck, and she was out running most people on the ground. She was marking everything in sight, and she kicked the ball left and right foot in an awkward style, but with some distance. And I went, okay, wonder who that girl is. And that girl later turned out to be Danny Marshall. And that's how it all started. I just happened to be honest, the right place in the right time. We have a saying in Australia, sometimes you're Johnny on the spot at the right time. And and it started there from that moment.
And you eventually reached out to them, and they took what you might call a leap of faith to come to Australia and to try to see what they had and see whether they could compete.
Yeah, Craig. Sarah was really keen. And I just said to Sarah and James, absolutely, and I'm happy to help you out and try and back you in with some connections, but it might be easier if you've got a travelling companion. So I
Okay.
asked them both, I said, if we're really serious about this, chase up that tall girl for me that was on your team, but was part of the other team. And then about a day after that in LA, someone actually told me, they said, "Oh, Danny's only been playing the game for 3 months." And I thought, okay, I just saw the best player with a lot of upside potential. And okay, she had only been playing for 3 months. And then I continued on the rest of my trip to the United States, came back to Australia, and very kindly, Sarah Edwards-Rona tracked Danny down. They had a conversation, and Sarah said to Danny, between Denver and Phoenix, I've got this guy in Australia. I've met him a couple of times. He's a cricket agent. He thinks we're both okay. He thinks we might have a shot at trialling for AFLW. And she contacted Danny, and then Danny ended up making contact with me, or I made contact with her. I'm not exactly sure now. It's about 18 months ago now, via Facebook, FaceTime or Facebook Messenger on video.
Okay.
And we had a conversation, and yep, both the young ladies took a leap of faith.
And you had, and both of these young ladies were, kind of somebody that you could see would be good ambassadors for the game, because, Americans tend to have a bit of a reputation of being brash and that type of thing. But, after having talked to Danny, I would say she's the polar opposite of that.
I've been very fortunate in my life. I've had a fantastic time over many trips to the US over many years for a variety of reasons, and met some fantastic Americans. And so I can only speak so highly of the time I've had. But both the girls are very modest, and they're both what I would call team-orientated people. And I can see that, and I can see that they would fit into the culture down here in Australia, because down here in Australia, especially in a sport like Aussie rules football, you need to be a team-orientated player, a team-first player. If you're not, you get found out pretty quickly, and you get sorted out fairly quickly.
Because and when you're out on the field, you definitely have to be team-oriented, because you are links in a chain in terms of moving the ball up and down the field, or preventing the ball from moving up and down the field. You're all dependent upon one another. That's true. So you
absolutely, and also in Aussie rules football, there's a lot of sacrificial acts from players, blocking, shepherding, tackling.
Yes.
That are crucial, that mightn't go on the stat sheet, but the coaches really appreciate. We call them 1%ers here in Australia, and the coaches really appreciate it. And both the girls have that ability to perform those 1%ers, as well as some other fantastic qualities they had. So yeah,
they do.
The girls took a leap of faith. They paid their own way to come out to Australia in May 2019, and the only thing I was able to offer them was, so I had some spare rooms at my home, and I said, look, I can provide you some accommodation at no cost to yourselves.
And that right there is a significant thing as well. You're opening up your home to somebody that you met in passing, and then somebody that you've only talked to online. I mean, that was a very kind thing on your part to do that. And again, it's another one of those, leaps of faith. It's, back to the 1%er thing real quickly. It's, they say this in basketball and in baseball and that type of thing, that it's, that a lot of what you would call the 1%ers, they're doing the kinds of things that don't necessarily show up in the statistics. But as you said, the coaches notice it.
100%. And they're the sort of players, those sort of players that teammates absolutely love and respect, and coaches love and respect. So, I saw those qualities in the girls in the US, and just talking to them, you could tell by just talking to them that there was going to be a commitment to what was really a long shot. Like, it was a pipe dream, a long shot, a punt, whatever you want to call it. And both the girls had an unbelievable, it was unbelievable brave decision for different reasons. Danny, married to her husband, Ryan, about to potentially start a family. You have to put those things on hold. She was starting a business that was starting to flourish. That gets put on hold. And Sarah, too, she's a 33-year-old lady from Denver with a young child. And even though her husband, John, and her young child, Michael, followed her halfway through the trip, it's tough to leave your little boy at home. To fulfill your dreams. So, there was a lot of courage shown, by a lot of people, not just the two girls involved directly. But there was a lot of family support from both the girls' husbands and families, and everyone took the leap of faith. And in May 2019, they both rolled into Melbourne.
It's the kind of story that, if the AFLW is a bigger game right now, this is the kind of story that they make movies out of.
Yeah, I was about to just talking about it, and I haven't thought much about it. And when you reflect on it, you're 100% right, Craig. They make it is a kind of story they can make a movie out of, and there's a happy ending at the end.
So
absolutely. It's one of those feel-good ones.
Absolutely.
At the end, yeah.
And once they got to Australia, you had basically said to them, "Well, we're going to have the opportunity to get you out to practice with some clubs, to maybe participate in some lower level games, that type of thing." And you mentioned when we talked earlier in the week, you mentioned how Sean Smith actually had some input in getting the information out to the clubs about Danny and about Sarah as they were making their way into Australia. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I was very fortunate that a connection and a long-time friend of mine here in Melbourne, a lady by the name of Alison Crabb, who's president of the Aberfeldy Football Club. And the Aberfeldy Football Club is one of the most respected and well-known football clubs, both in the male and female space. And their female program had grown exponentially through Alison and their committee, their president, Jim Pound, and their coach, Claire. They'd really built a great female program. And a number of former AFL stars, Sean Smith, Simon Madden, their daughters actually play at Aberfeldy. Okay. And so I got to meet Sean through once Danny had got in and Sarah had got to Aberfeldy. And when he'd seen specifically Danny play, he was that taken with her ability. He started to make some immediate contact to a couple of AFL club coaches, AFLW coaches that he had connections with, and said, sort of to the, without the precise words, "Hey, there's a girl that's coming from America. You people need to have a really close look at because she's really good."
That's terrific. And this is all by chance. This is all by chance. This was not planned out. This was not, had you not made it to Los Angeles to watch those games, this isn't.
Well,
you and I
met Danny Marshall.
You and I aren't talking. Yeah.
And
you and I are not talking to each other.
Conversation.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm glad you went to Los Angeles.
So am I.
Yeah, this has been so she gets out to play with Aberfeldy. She's making an impression. And, for those of us that are in the States, and I'm still learning about this as well, she was not part of the draft per se when it came time for the club to add players to the club. And last year they brought 4 new teams in. Looks like they're pushing back they're hoping to get to have 18 AFLW teams to match the 18 that are in the AFL, but it sounds like those last 4 are going to get pushed off for at least a couple of years right now as things hopefully stabilize. But how did she end up with the Bulldogs?
Okay, Alison, in addition to having the presidency Aberfeldy also runs a leadership training business and is a very, very savvy businesswoman in the area of corporate leadership. She actually runs the Western Bulldogs AFL leadership program. And she'd said to the coaches and the recruiting staff of the Bulldogs, look, there's a couple of girls here in Melbourne that are playing with Aberfeldy at the moment. You might want to have a look at and allow them to have a training run. And we had a meeting with the Bulldogs with Debbie Lee, who's the head of football, and Mick Sandra, who's the head of recruiting. And they mapped out a plan. They said, okay, girls, not a problem at all. We're happy to have you here at the Bulldogs. We're happy to have you train with us for the next 3 weeks. And, you know, before the girls knew it, they were sharing a change room with people like Brooke Lachlan and Izzy Huntington and players of this ilk that are stars in the AFLW. You know, the girls have rolled off a plane, had a couple of games at Aberfeldy, and all of a sudden they're standing in the change rooms of the Whitten Oval, doing a warm-up with some established AFLW stars. And it was a whirlwind, absolute whirlwind. And then the girls literally just started training with the Bulldogs. One of the things that the girls asked the Bulldogs in the meeting was for honesty, because they're only here for a short period of time. And the girls said to the Bulldogs in the meeting, the initial meeting, look, guys, if we know you've got plenty of fantastic women here in Australia. I remember Danny saying this. I know you've got plenty of fantastic women here in Australia. If we're not good enough, just tell us as early as you can, because we can either go and trial with other teams or seek our opportunity elsewhere. And the Bulldogs said the same thing. We'll give you honesty, but if you are good enough, we want first crack at making an offer.
Okay.
And so with that training, they then commenced training with the Western Bulldogs.
So they trained, and I guess the way it works is that each club is allowed to have 3 international players that are not part of the draft process.
Yeah. The VFL system allows you to add up to 10 players out from outside of your list. I think it is. I'm not 100% au fait with the rules. I'm a certified or registered cricket manager here in Australia, so I'm very, very up to the rules of management and cricketing contracts and lists and what have you. With football, I'm not as up to that. But the Bulldogs assured us that if the girls were good enough, they'd be able to be added to the VFL team. And within about a week of training, Danny was actually added to the Bulldogs VFL team and went down to Williamstown Football Club to play a Friday night game against Williamstown for the Western Bulldogs VFL team. And to say that it had been a whirlwind experience to realise you've gone from a park in Marina Del Rey in Los Angeles to a couple of games in community football at Essendon District Football League with Aberfeldy into the second best competition in the world within a 6-month period and over the space of about 3 games. It was like, wow.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I must admit, myself, Craig, I didn't sleep much on the Thursday night pre the Friday night game. I got one, and I don't know if Danny will be happy for me to share this story, or a mum will be happy for her to share this story. But I actually had a conversation the night before to a mum, Mary Ann, who I'd never met, and I still to this day haven't personally met. We've spoken through social media and what have you a number of times when we've met through speaking on video, but we haven't met personally. Her mum actually put my mind at ease when her mum said, "Don't worry, she'll be okay." Her mum had never seen a game of AFL or VFL football, and I wasn't quite sure how her mum would know she'd be okay, but she said one thing to me. She said, in her sporting career, the better the competition is, the better she gets. She'll be okay, Cameron.
Wow.
And I put the
Okay.
phone down. I thought, okay, that gives me a little bit of comfort. I still didn't sleep much, hoping she'd do well. But all of a sudden, we found ourselves on a Friday night in May at the Williamstown football ground preparing for a VFL game. It was exciting. It was really exciting.
It is very cool. Now, you mentioned when we were talking the other day that there was a bit of a social media frenzy that happened when Facebook was tracking her when you went to RSEA Park, and
yeah, that's a little bit. Yeah, that's an interesting one, Craig. She'd played a couple of games for the Bulldogs and done very well, and there was an underlying, I'll call it an underlying current that the Bulldogs were getting keener and keener, and Danny was getting very keen on the Bulldogs and starting to develop some friendships fairly quickly with some of the Bulldog VFL and AFLW players. And Danny had a friend who lives here in Melbourne and has been in Melbourne for a number of years, playing down at St Kilda, and they train and play out of RSCA Park in a suburb in Melbourne called Moorabbin. So quite innocently, we went down there on an off night just to watch her friend train. And Dan's, we were waiting inside. It was quite a cold night by this stage. We'd probably skipped along to about late May, early June, and Melbourne was just in the onset of winter. So waiting inside, and her internet or the Wi-Fi must have picked up, and Facebook checked her location in to the St Kilda Football Club. We only found out afterwards, coming home from that training night, when we were sitting down for some dinner at a restaurant, and she had about 5 or 6 messages from her now teammates asking, "What are you doing at the St Kilda Football Club?" And to Danny's horror, there was probably a little bit of backtracking and a few apologies the next day and some assurances it was only quite an innocent thing, being at Moorabbin watching a friend train. But it did cause quite a little internal frenzy amongst a few people.
That's both the I guess the blessing and the curse of electronic tracking and knowing where you are and that sort of thing. When I send my kids out on trips, that sort of thing. I've always said to them, now that they've got their smartphones, turn on your tracking so I can see where you are on your trip. So I know, I have an idea of when you're going to be where you're going to get to. So she ultimately, she ends up joining the Bulldogs, and
yep.
You talked about, there's a great video out there, as she's getting ready to make this move to Australia. There's this great video of her husband, Ryan, who, according to my conversation last week, and it sounds like I'm going to have to agree with her, is the best husband in the world. Those are Danny's words. And from what I have read and what I've seen, I agree with her on that. I think my wife might agree too. But but there was a video, and you said you were with him at one instance where it was kind of a surreal moment with Ryan, and you had a really good story about Ryan in Australia. If you would be interested in sharing that one.
Yeah, Ryan came down. Danny had 2 stints. He had the first stint in May, and then the Bulldogs offer a deal which he took back home with her to discuss with Ryan to make sure it was the life decision they wanted to make. Signed the deal, signed the contract, the international rookie contract with the Bulldogs. So then she'd already discussed with the Bulldogs prior to leaving the first time to go back to the States about returning for the back half of the VFL season. And then Ryan paid his own way to come over and support part of the second trip and have a look at where they were going to live and, introduce himself to Melbourne. Anyway, Dan had a game, and I think it was about a 2:00 start. We didn't need to be there that early. So Ryan and myself went and did a little bit of innocent shopping. And then we had to drop into a cricket centre. And we drop into this cricket centre, and after about 2 minutes, this guy approaches the counter where we were standing, and I was talking to some people, and he just looks at Ryan and he just starts going, "You're the guy. you're the guy. And Ryan sort of took a step back, and I'm thinking, yeah, you're the guy. He goes, on the video, your wife plays AFLW football. And with that, Ryan just started laughing and sort of looking at me and going, yep, I'm the guy. I guess I'm the guy. So obviously this fan had seen Ryan and seen that video and just happened to be randomly at the cricket centre on the same morning we were there. It was an extraordinary moment.
And
so I guess he'd realised that made Ryan realise that his wife had made a fairly big impression in a very short period of time.
do you think that, well, first of all, did that video actually end up on the news in Australia, or was that something that they probably just found on YouTube?
Yeah, it just did the social media rounds.
Okay, so it was not something.
Yeah, it wasn't on the mainstream news. It just did the social media rounds. It was done by Phoenix, one of the TV networks in Phoenix, that had cottoned onto the story, and they wanted to do a follow up. And I think Danny, when they interviewed Ryan, I'm not even sure if Danny was back in Phoenix at the time. Honestly, can't remember. She may have been here, but I'm 100%.
I think she was there because I think she came and gave him a hug after he got done talking, if I recall correctly.
Of course. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, right. Your memory's a little bit better than mine on that one.
Now that, Danny has had some success at this high level with the AFLW, is there a conscious effort right now that's being made to try to find the next AFLW player here in the States? Is this where they're going to start to look for more players?
I wouldn't say there's a conscious effort at the moment, but certainly there's an aspect of Danny being a pioneer. And what I would say, and it's an extraordinary thing what she's done. I guess if I could say before I answer your question directly, Craig, if I can, what she's done is one of the most extraordinary things. I've been involved in sport at a professional level in a variety of sports for 35 years. And either myself as a player, an umpire, or in an administrative or managerial capacity for a long time. I've never seen anything like this. It's extraordinary that a girl could play a game in a foreign country that doesn't really play the game for 3 months, impress someone who just happened to be randomly where she was playing, but impress someone enough to think, gee, she's talented. That's impressive enough, just that. But then to take it, to just hedge your bets, come over to the country with no promises, pay your own way, and then impress the Western Bulldogs enough in a very, very short space of time, i.e. 4 weeks, that they would offer her a contract. It's extraordinary. But then to be able to compete on an AFLW field she probably played 10 VFL games, including a grand final. The VFL season was very beneficial for Danny and obviously the Bulldogs, because the VFL team went all the way to the grand final in 2019. But to see her compete in a VFL grand final after effectively 10 games of football, and that's not discounting anything she'd done in the USA, but obviously the standard of football. The analogy I've got, and if I could give this to the listeners, the analogy and I've actually shared this one with Danny, it's like you're a swimmer and you've swum a few laps of a swimming pool, and then the swimming coach looks at you and says, come with me. And he takes you to the Olympic final, and in you go. That's the analogy. That's how big it is.
Yeah.
So she basically was an okay swimmer, and then all of a sudden, with not much practice, found herself in the Olympic final.
It is amazing when you think about it.
It's amazing. So my point to get to your question directly about a conscious effort of Are the AFL making a conscious effort of recruiting to America? No. They should be, but they're not. But what I will say, if there's a person out there who thinks they can make it and they have a reasonable level of ability and a desire to make it, we can help them make it. Because Danny Marshall's shown you can do it. Mason Cox has shown you can do it. There's 2 live examples.
Yeah.
Mason Cox is an amazing footballer in the AFL with the Collingwood Footy Club. Amazing. He's a game changer. He influences and wins games for the Collingwood Football Club when he's on. Danny Marshall's pioneered a pathway, and that pathway might start at the Aberfeldy Football Club for some young Americans if they think they've got a genuine shot. But you've got to have an incredible desire and take an incredible leap of faith. So you've got to have an enormous amount of courage to do what she's done. That if they're not actively looking, you can get them to look at you. You can be good enough. And there are a number of, I'm a little bit remiss of knowing their names. There are 3 or 4, I believe, young American girls dotted around Australia over the last 12 months that are playing various levels of football here in this country with the dream of following in the Danny Marshall footsteps.
I didn't realize that there were already some that had begun to make that move there. That's terrific. That's terrific. And
there's a girl, and Danny is a friend of, I think her name's April, and her surname, and I must apologise, it escapes me. Was on the VFL list for the Essendon Bombers last year, and I think at last call she's playing what we know as a summer competition or a winter competition. I'm not sure, up in the Northern Territory, I believe. So I think there are a couple. But yeah, I mean, if you're an athlete, football's a kick and catch game. And if you can run and you're an athlete and you can run, you can be taught to kick and catch. I've got no doubt about that. So, if you want to live a dream and follow a story, and maybe if your chosen sport in the US is not quite doing it for you, or the opportunities just aren't there, or there's too much competition for spots, Australian rules football is an outstanding opportunity. And as you said, Craig, earlier in the conversation, you said there are 4 more teams coming into the AFL. So if list sizes remain the same, there's around about 30 players on an AFLW list at the moment. That's another 120 players that need to be found. And they can be easily found within this country, because female football here in Australia, or girls football at the younger levels, is exploding. It is the fastest growing sport probably on the planet at the moment, because young girls now, 12, 13, 14, 15 years of age here in Australia, can see a pathway, and the AFL needs to be commended.
That was going to lead me into my next avenue here of questions. Until that groundswell of these younger players who play the game for 8, 9, 10 years reach the age to where they can play in the AFLW. Right now, the AFLW is drawing in athletes from all sorts of different avenues, whether it be cricket or netball or soccer, that type of thing. Based upon what you have seen, what type of athlete from what background do you think is able to make the easiest transition to footy?
Soccer athletes, obviously, because it's a game where you've got to have tremendous speed and endurance, and it's a kicking game, soccer. Netball or basketball, because of the evasive skills. There's a number of basketballers on the male side in Australia that have transitioned into AFL football. So if you're a college basketball player and you've got speed and agility, you can play AFL football, no problem. If you're a gridiron player with the or a US football player with the tackling and running ability of a running back or a linebacker these sort of people, you can play AFLW, no problem. As I said, if you're an athlete, you can run. If you've got speed and agility, and you're prepared to listen to coaches and be taught running patterns, you can transition in this game.
That's great advice, and I'm hoping that some of the folks that are listening here in the U.S. who are thinking that, hey, my collegiate career of athletics or even my high school career is ending, that maybe there's another avenue, whether it be in the USAFL, because we've got dozens of teams across the country that are playing. So
that Craig would be my recommendation to people. My recommendation, if there are some listeners who are listening to the podcast and want to find a new sport in the US, I would highly encourage them to find a US AFL club in their area. There are many, many very dedicated clubs dotted around the United States. In most of the major cities in the US, they'll find a team. You'll meet some phenomenal people and have a phenomenal time. And if you start to dominate those games, the United States competes in the International Rules Series, which there's an International Rules Series on the Sunshine Coast in 2021 that the AFL teams, I've got no doubt the scouts will be up watching that International Rules Series for both male and female. And if you're good enough and you're able to make the US national team for that, then you'll get spotted or you'll get scouted here in Australia. I've got no doubt.
So, when we talked the other day, we got into just how important the AFLW game is from like a societal standpoint. Can you expound on that a little bit? Because you said that this is a really important thing for the country itself, not just for the sake of sport, for other things as well.
It's outstanding. It's an outstanding. There's two sports here in this country that are leading the world in female participation and providing a pathway now for females to make a professional living, and that's the AFLW and cricket. Both those sports have done an outstanding job. It's so important because back in the day, I can picture it, in a family where you might have two brothers and a sister, and the boys are out the back kicking the footy in the backyard. The sister is left out of that situation because obviously the brothers want to kick the footy with each other. And then, of course, the boys go on the football on a Saturday or Sunday morning. Their sister goes along because she has to with really nothing to do. But now, since the AFLW, young girls, the amount of young girls you see at football now, it's extraordinary. The amount of young girls you see on grounds after games kicking the football, it's bringing families together because all of a sudden now the whole family is involved in football. And the girls are actually leading the charge and saying, Mum, Dad, come out the back for a kick. And it's not just the boys' domain anymore. And there's so much, and we're starting to see the very first influx now at the Bulldogs, where Chris Grant, his daughter, Izzy, is made has been signed as a father-daughter. And we're starting to see that amongst a number of clubs. So now, players of this day, not the old father and son combination as far as getting signed with under the father-son rule. There'll be father-daughter rules where daughters of the some famous footballers are going to be signed, and I know that's going to make their fathers and their mums incredibly proud and continue that family name, amongst their football club, and it excites the fans. And I saw Chris's daughter play an AFLW practice match, and she danced around a couple of players and pinged this short pass, and she had the number 3 on. And I went to her dad and I said, "It's in the genes." And he said, she might have a bit more talent than I have. I think Dad was being a little bit kind because he was a pretty handy player. But, it's exciting for the fans.
Well, you figure in a generation, they're going to have to make some adjustments for mother-daughter as opposed to father-daughter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. And that's awesome. So it's bringing society together. It's bringing families together. It's making it all inclusive for everyone. And it's doubling the fan base, for football. And the AFL, and the VFL, they need to be, complimented and in what they've done, and it's only going to grow. It's going to continue to grow, and it's a 20-25 year investment in the game. But in 20 or 25 years, the standard of football will be phenomenal. It'll be absolutely phenomenal, and we've got it now. We've got some phenomenal female athletes running around in the AFLW. In 20 years' time, they'll be even more phenomenal than what they are now.
That's going to be exciting to see. I mean, it really is. It's and I think even in 10 years, you're going to, and I've noticed just in the few years that I've been watching that there's been a marked improvement from year to year as the players get another year's worth of training under their belt, that they become more, because again, we talked about earlier, they're bringing their skill set from netball or soccer or basketball or whatever the case may be, that they're developing the skills of this new game, and it's being reflected. I'm going to use an example, somebody that, who, I don't know a lot of the players, but somebody that I, would see all the time on Bounce, Sharni Layton, who was a phenomenal netball player from what I have been told. But early on, the first year or so that she was playing footy, she looked like she struggled a little bit, but this year I noticed a marked improvement in terms of her skill set this.
Yeah, you pick up the rhythm of the game and the nuances in the game, and that's one of Danny's challenges that she faced once she, we became aware she was going to make it, was then to pick up the nuances and the bits of the game that aren't as obvious, and they get trained into you, and the more games you play, it's like anything you do in life. The more you do it, the better you get at it, and Shani's making a tremendous impact on football now for Collingwood. So, and she'll encourage other netballers, at that elite level, if netball's not quite doing it for them for whatever reason, to make the transition.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to kind of transition to some things that are going on in the present here, because there's really nothing going on in front of the scenes, but behind the scenes, there are all sorts of plans that are being talked about and discussed to get the footy season up and running when it's time to do so. And there have been all kinds of different ideas that have been tossed out there. One of them was this idea of having these hubs where you would send, a half dozen teams to like 3 different hubs. And I think they've talked about Darwin and Cairns, I believe. I remember watching a game in Cairns the beginning of last year. I think it was Gold Coast and North, where they were playing in a monsoon. And I mean, I'd never seen rain that heavy. And it was, so there's talk about, taking a half dozen teams to those areas. Do you think that's a viable solution to get the season underway?
It seemed, on face value, it seems so, although there is a big think tank and things with the current environment, Craig, as I'm sure they are globally, the environment changes on a daily basis. So that, the hub idea is very heavily discussed here in Australia by, there's a number of AFL presidents, Peter Gordon from the Bulldogs, Eddie Maguire from Collingwood, a number of other presidents who sit on I'll call it a think tank or a strategic planning committee with the powers that be in the AFL to get the game, and obviously everyone wants to get the game back going as soon as they possibly can. So the hub idea does seem very feasible because it limits travel and it limits the movement of people unnecessarily to base them. The big issue from the players point of view as being away from their families, because AFL football, it's a sport where you're used to being in your home state or in, every week, and then you go and travel for a game and you're immediately back. It's not like a baseball trip where you do a 4 or 5 day road trip. You do a 2-day road trip and then you're back. So what happens to families, especially players with young children, and if their wives have got to work, and there's so many other factors, life factors that are being discussed. But as I understand it, the hub is just one plan of a number of fluid plans that change daily depending on what happens with this COVID-19 situation globally.
And it's looking likely that whatever happens, that fan supporters are going to probably be relegated to just watching the games on television. It looks like. Yeah,
it would seem so. Yeah, it would seem so.
That doesn't work. That doesn't work too badly for me, because that's my only avenue right now watching. But for people who are accustomed to being in the stands and cheering their heart out, it's going to be a bit of a culture shock, which this year itself has already been that, because the games aren't happening. Now there have also been.
Yeah, there's been some talk, just quickly, there has been some talk about creating, through special effects, creating the sounds of a crowd at a game for the players. Because I think the feedback from what I've just heard from the general press, from the players, was that they obviously had to create their own excitement in round one. And that was okay because it was only one game, as it's turned out to be, but to have to continually do that week in, week out for the players is going to be very tough. And so there has been some recent talk here in Australia about, with some very sophisticated special effects, creating a crowd.
No, I know. I know exactly what you mean. What do you think about that? Is that is that kind of an over the top solution to you, or do you think that's a practical thing to do?
No, I haven't. I really honestly haven't given it too much thought, to be honest, to tell you the honest truth.
I want to get into a little bit of your background here before we wrap up, but I had one other thing I wanted to dive into, and this looks like it's been a bit of an issue that some people are a little bit leery of, and that's what's going on with the Giants right now, where you've had a couple of business people here from the States who have invested several $1 million into GWS, and there's concern about this specter, if you will, of private ownership of clubs in the AFL. Is that something that concerns you, or is that something that you see possibly as an inevitability to help maybe stabilize? I know that the league got the big loan from the different banks, but is this something that you see could be beneficial, whether it be investors from Australia or from wherever, maybe not China right now, that would be helping to provide some funds to help stabilize the different teams?
Yeah, look, private ownership in this country has never really been a successful model. That's not saying it can't be a successful model. One of the big issues that prevents a lot of owners investing in sports in this country is that the ownership of the stadiums are owned by various entities, and there's never been a private owner, to my knowledge, in a major sport here in Australia that's actually owned the stadium and then been able to control the revenue that comes in and out of that stadium. So that's been the big block on private ownership. There was some thought about 8 or 9 years ago in cricket, when the what's called the Big Bash League, which is a T20 cricket league here in Australia, that might be part privately owned, but the owners balked at the opportunity for investment when they found out that they weren't going to own the stadium. There are a couple of businessmen in Sydney who are very closely aligned with GWS. They're American billionaires, and it has been mooted in press coverage that they may have some potential interest, but that would need the approval of the AFL. It would need the approval of the member base of GWS, because clubs in Australia are effectively owned by the members. So we need a certain percentage of members to vote it favourably. But in the current economic climate that we're in, where funding for sporting teams isn't as guaranteed as what it was 2 months ago, for instance, basically any model that is going to provide the necessary funding to fund an AFL team and an AFLW team, because not only now do teams have, and this is what people in the US may not be aware of, Craig, that teams don't only need to fund their AFL men's team and their AFLW women's team, they also need to fund the VFL men's team and the VFL women's team. So the clubs have got to fund 4 teams now. So the pressure on clubs to raise money from the traditional means is getting harder and harder. So I think any financial model that brings the necessary finance to the game.
Yeah, I saw something recently, if I'm not mistaken, that Carlton shut down their VFL club. I thought I saw that.
Okay. I haven't seen that. You may be a bit more aware of that. I'm not certain that that's the case, but I haven't seen that. But it may have been some recent news. I've been heavily occupied myself in the last couple of days. It's cricket contract time, so it's a busy time for me professionally in cricket. So I'm heavily involved with some clients that I represent in discussions with them at the moment and prospective teams. So I may not be across all the news.
Okay, and that kind of leads me into to what I was gonna kind of finish up with here today. And you mentioned earlier that you had been involved with sports at different levels for the last 35 or so years. You started out with the Bulldogs back in the late 1980s, if I'm not mistaken, or with Fitz. And you transitioned into a couple of different things. You worked with the Monarchs in the Australian Baseball League, and then you were general manager of the National League soccer team as well. And after those things, you decided to venture out and create your own company, this Global Sports 360. And tell us a little bit about what your company does.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. It's nice to have that opportunity. Yeah, we're a sports management agency, and we manage primarily at the moment in cricket, which is the chosen summer sport here in Australia. The closest thing for our American listeners is baseball, so it's very similar into a baseball game. And so I'm a cricket agent, predominantly in the female space. I do have a couple of male clients as well, but I've morphed predominantly in the female space and look after the management of the contracts and endorsements of those people. And then Danny, she's part of that group now, obviously, part of my management group, and the cricket girls too have been. They all follow her on Instagram and Facebook, and they've all followed the story. And some of them have been lucky enough to meet her, and she's been lucky enough to meet them too. And they share stories and what have you. So yeah, we're Global Sports 360. We're predominantly a cricket agency management service, but we can take athletes on from most sports.
Yeah, and because I looked around your website and I saw that it was predominantly cricket players, and I was going to ask, and you mentioned it already. That you're predominantly cricket at the moment, but you were maybe looking at expanding, and you brought Danny on board as well. So maybe she'll be a good stepping stone to help to increase your client base as well. Then. Oh.
Yeah. You don't do it for those reasons. I think it's important in a managerial business too that you're actually able to be integral for your clients and actually look after them. And sometimes if you have too many, then you just don't have the physical man hours to take care of them properly. But hopefully all the girls are happy, and at the moment they're all contracted. Terrific. And they're all playing. So
terrific.
That's a great start.
Well, so, we've covered pretty much everything that I had on my list, and there were a couple things that we talked about off air that we were not going to get into on air. some funny stories and some things which are completely fine. I wasn't gonna, put you on the spot or anything like that, but I thank you for taking time out of your Friday evening to sit down with me. I hope this was fun. I hope you enjoyed this and like the opportunity to,
It's been awesome. Yeah, and if I can
absolutely,
just finish
absolutely.
just really quickly, Craig, it's been absolutely awesome. It's been great to get to know you personally in the last little while as well. And this is the beauty of sport. Your connections from people all around the world. I've got some tremendous friends in the United States. And in fact, if I can just
Absolutely.
mention it really quickly, the Melbourne Monarchs guys, really quickly, we're about to have a Zoom chat with about 20 of us, and about half the guys reside in the US tomorrow morning. It's going to be a ton of fun to reconnect with some 25-year friendships. Tomorrow morning is going to be great. But if I can just, for the people in the US and the people here in Australia that are not totally familiar with Danny's story, it's genuine amazing. It's phenomenal. She's a phenomenal young lady, and her family are just great people, and we're really, really proud of what she's done. And it's only the tip of the iceberg. I know now she's training really diligently in this COVID-19 period, and I'm sure as the next years roll on, she's going to make America really proud, and her family really proud of her efforts. And I know it's been a phenomenal for me personally to just play a really small part in that, and now I just sit back proudly and I watch it unfold.
Yeah, you are in many ways, you have a hand in changing the history of the game in your country just by having, going to that game in Los Angeles.
Yeah, you're too kind. Very, 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 very small. Very, very small cog in a really big wheel. She's the one that's done it. She took all the risk, and now she's taken the opportunity. But that didn't come without a hell of a lot of risk and a hell of a lot of effort. The amount of training that she did prior to coming to Australia by herself, with her husband, I should say, and by herself for 4 or 5 months in the 40-degree searing heat in Arizona. The amount of hours she put into it by herself showed an unbelievable commitment, before she arrived. And now she's getting some reward for that, and she richly deserves it. So that, she deserves all the success that comes her way, and it's exciting, and we look forward to seeing it unfold. I just hope people follow the story, and if they're in Australia or they're at a game or they're at a US AFL game in the United States and she happens to be back home, go up and say hello.
Yes,
and she'll be more than happy to
I'm hoping
that
I've become friends with her on Instagram and I think on Facebook as well, and I'm hoping she's all right with me reaching out to her and wishing her luck, that type of thing. But she seems to be a very grounded and genuine person, and I was thrilled to be able to talk with her last week. It was a great, I talked to her for about 45 minutes like we did today. I talked to her for like 45 minutes before I ever turned on the recording. And then we still had about an hour and a half conversation. It was phenomenal. Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Awesome, Craig. Yeah. And too, mate, the work that people like yourself are doing in the United States to grow our game, it's phenomenal. And if I can help that in any way, shape or form, I'd love to, because I love football. I love cricket. And I love our country here in Australia. It's a magnificent country. If you're in the United States and you've not had the chance to visit,
it is on my list of things to hopefully do someday. But it's I'm hoping to get there. Like I think I'd mentioned the other day, I've got to get my youngest through college and get her on her way, and then hopefully I can venture out and do that. But yeah.
Yes. Hopefully the world's return to normal really soon, and people are going to be able to start to freely travel again and all of those things, because there's we're all doing it. There's a lot of people in both our respective countries all around the world whose
Right,
families are
right.
doing it tough at the moment. So, let's just hope that this phase of life passes through without too many more casualties or hiccups or people getting ill
Exactly.
or deaths, even worse. And we're all about to resume
Yeah.
normal service fairly quickly, and
You bet,
then
sir.
we'll
And
see you
I
down
will
in
be back
Australia
in
one day,
touch
mate.
because you were gracious enough to say, hey, I'll kind of guide you in directions and maybe trying to, work out some connections with meeting up with some people online and hoping to find other, prospective guests for the show. I appreciate you making that offer. That was very generous of you. And, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank my guest today, Mr. Cameron Richardson, the managing director of Global Sports 360. I had a lot of fun with this discussion. I'm hoping he did as well. And I hope those of you who are listening enjoyed today's podcast. I hope that you'll consider sharing this podcast with your friends because would love to get, Danny's message out there to as many people as possible, whether it be here in the States or in Australia. And before I go ahead and end this, I would like to congratulate Fro Jernhardt on his inaugural episode of the Stray Dog Footy. He's a Bulldogs fan, a huge Bulldogs fan. It was a real fun look at how he became such a huge supporter of the Bulldogs. And Frode, I wish you luck going forward with that. And Mr. Richardson, I truly appreciate you taking time out of your evening to sit down and talk with me. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Craig.
You
It's been an
bet.
absolute pleasure.
Talk with me. Thank you so very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I honestly cannot tell you how humbled I feel knowing that you're tuning in to listen to my show. I cannot thank you enough. It is greatly appreciated. The last 2 weeks have been huge for my podcast as I've put out 4 episodes in a relatively short period of time. It may have been a little bit overwhelming for you as a listener, but I've simply had some great stories to bring you, and I wanted to get them out to you as quickly as I possibly can, especially in our time of being sequestered away in our homes. I'm looking to help out in my small way to fill the void that we're all feeling while we're waiting on the return of footy, and that we're waiting on the return of some semblance of normalcy to return in our lives. I'm just trying to do my part, my small part, and I, again, truly appreciate you listening. If you didn't get a chance to enjoy any of those episodes, they're all available for you at your favorite podcast hosting site. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I would greatly appreciate it if you would share it with your friends. Even if everybody shared it with just 1 or 2 friends, that would help to grow the listener base, and it would help me to get my message out to more and more people and help grow the game of footy here in the U.S. and help to let you in Australia know just how much we appreciate your wonderful game. Don't forget that while you can find all the episodes of this podcast at ayankonthefooty.podbean.com, you can also find it on your favorite podcast provider. And now that you've listened, I would love it if you'd consider giving me a review on the podcast host that you're using. If you're on the Podbean app, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you're on Apple, I would love a review. If I've earned a 5-star, I'd greatly appreciate it, but I love honesty as well. Don't forget that you can reach me at ayankonthefooty@gmail.com and on Twitter at @yank_on, as well as on Facebook and Instagram at @ayankonthefooty. Also, I'd like to thank Mr. Joseph McDade for the use of 2 of his great pieces of music. Mr. McDade has created some fantastic music, and I'm using the pieces Elevation and Winter's Mist. You can reach him at josephmcdade.com/music. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to thank Mr. Cameron Richardson again of Global Sports 360 for being my guest for this episode. It was a great discussion that we had to build upon what Danny Marshall and I had talked about last week, but to also delve in a little bit more deeply into the game itself as well. And ladies and gents, while many of us are fans of our teams, deep down we're fans of a game that we all love, and that's the game of footy. We are at a strange point in the recent history of mankind, ladies and gentlemen. We're seeing some positive glimpses around the world. Hopefully we keep going in that direction. I hope that you and your family can stay safe. I hope that you're able to take the proper measures to protect yourself against this virus. Be tolerant of one another. Be kind to one another. Have some fun. Laugh. Make good memories. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for listening, and I ask that you share this podcast with your friends and family. And may your dribble kick never hit the post. I'll catch you later. This has been episode number 20 of A Yank on the Footy. My guest was Cameron Richardson of Global Sports 360. Don't forget that you can reach me at yank_on on Twitter or at ayankonthefooty@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at A Yank on the Footy. Again, thanks for listening, and please consider sharing the podcast with your friends and family. I'll talk to you very soon, ladies and gentlemen.